Burawoy creció en Manchester, Inglaterra. Se formó como matemático en la Universidad de Congreso. Y luego transitó hacia la sociología, cursando un magíster en la disciplina en la Universidad de Zambia y un doctorado en la Universidad de Chicago. Desde el año 1976 integra el Departamento de Sociología de la Universidad de California, Berkeley, en Estados Unidos. Burawoy actualmente es el presidente de la Asociación Internacional de Sociología por el periodo 2010-2014. Con anterioridad fue primero presidente de la Asociación Americana de Sociología, en el 2004, y vicepresidente del Comité de Asociaciones Nacionales de la Asociación Internacional de Sociología, en el periodo 2006-2010. En camino a Buenos Aires, donde la próxima semana tendrá lugar el Foro Internacional de la Asociación Internacional de Sociología, el profesor Burawoy tuvo la gentileza de aceptar nuestra invitación, que fue gestionada por nuestro colega Alejandro Perfini y por la profesora Fernanda Bello de la Universidad Nacional de Julio, para donde parte mañana, una vida muy agitada. Quiero agradecerle a Fernanda y a Alejandro por gestionar esta visita. Burawoy es un activo analista de la organización del trabajo. Trabajando él mismo como operador de maquinarias, en calderas o como administrativo de industrias mineras, ha investigado la producción industrial en países como Zambia, Hungría, Estados Unidos y Rusia. A lo largo de su trayectoria ha problematizado fenómenos como las formas que quiere la conciencia de clase, la organización del socialismo estatal, la transición del socialismo al capitalismo o al postcolonialismo. Sus etnografías sobre trabajadores industriales en Chicago formaron el libro Manufacturing Consent, Changes in Labor Processes Under Monopoly Capitalism, publicado por Chicago Press en 1979. Su trabajo en una industria siderúrgica en Hungría fue publicado en The Iranian Past, Ideology and Reality in Hungarian's Road to Capitalism, publicado por la Universidad de Chicago en 1992. Uno de sus últimos libros, Though No Free, Forces, Connections and Imaginations in a Postmodern World, del año 2000, retrata las consecuencias de la globalización en la experiencia vivida de distintas personas en situación de calle, activistas tratando de crear conciencia sobre el cáncer de pecho, ingenieros tecnológicos, trabajadores del Estado de Bienestar. Así, estudiando el mundo industrial desde abajo, Burawoy puede ser considerado como uno de los renovadores de la tradición teórica y metodológica marxista en sociología. En los últimos años ha girado desde el estudio de fábricas al estudio de otro lugar de trabajo, la academia, la universidad, para reflexionar sobre la producción y organización del conocimiento sociológico, así como sobre el rol de la disciplina en la arena pública. Puedo dar fe que durante estos 2 días, solo 2 días que llevo aquí, ya he acumulado bastante datos empíricos sobre la sociología chilena. He salido de terreno, he hecho clases, he conversado con sociólogos, con estudiantes hoy día. A través de esta interrogación al oficio y su relación con la sociedad, Burawoy se ha convertido en uno de los máximos exponentes de la sociología pública, por la que se ha pronunciado desde sus presidencias de la Asociación Americana de Sociología y de la Asociación Internacional de Sociología. A este respecto, Burawoy ha propuesto una tipología de la disciplina compuesta por una sociología profesional, cuya audiencia sería la propia comunidad sociológica, a la que interpela desde sus teorías y métodos; una sociología aplicada, policy sociology, que estaría orientada a dar respuesta a preguntas provenientes de otros campos; una sociología crítica, que examinaría los fundamentos y convenciones metodológicas, teóricas, filosóficas de la sociología profesional, operando como la conciencia reflexiva de la disciplina, y una sociología pública, que estaría abocada a entablar conversaciones con diversos públicos, vehiculizando discusiones de interés general sobre la naturaleza y los valores de la sociedad, sus malestares y sus tendencias. La conferencia que Burawoy dictará a continuación abordará justamente los dilemas de la sociología pública. Bienvenido a parte de la comunidad de sociología chilena.
It's really a great honor to be here. So my first time in Chile. I did most of, as Ariana has been saying, I did a lot of my research in Africa, in Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, often very depressing places. And many of my students actually studied Latin America. Many of them went to Brazil, some went to Chile, and they always came back with exciting stories. And I knew that I should not go to Latin America, because if I went to Latin America, I would never come back. It would be much too exciting. But since I have been president of the International Sociological Association, I have made it my mission to come to different places in Latin America. And I really am delighted to have had a chance to come to Chile. And as I was saying yesterday, when I was in Zambia studying the copper industry, I was always thinking about what was happening in Chile in the copper industry. This is 1968 to 1972. And in Zambia, the copper industry was nationalized in 1972 in a deal, negotiation that took place on a golf course between the president of Zambia and the top executives of the mining companies. In this country, as I saw it, the American companies were fighting viciously with the state. Anyway, copper is what brought my first interest into Chile, and it has never stopped since then. Many of us in 1973 watched with horror the Battle of Chile and the deposition of Allende. I was learning Marxist theories of the state at the time, and most recently, last year, all eyes were on Chile, on the student movement in Chile. And of course, one of the interesting questions I have is to learn more about it while I'm here. So, for those and many other reasons, I am really delighted to be. I never to come to this country that on the map is an enormously long, thin country. I've always been ambitious to come here. So, I am here thanks to Ariana and others who have organized my trip. And I have indeed been interrogating Ariana for the last, almost 48 hours about her work and other people's work. I am going to be talking about public sociology. And I know that your Dean Marcus, is actually an anthropologist. Well, for today, we're the same, okay? Anthropology equals sociology. Who is he, actually? Be very careful. Are most of you sociologists? Hands up of the sociologists here. Identified sociologists. Any anthropologists? Oh, you're singular. Any economists? One. I'm only going... one economist. I have to excuse me, I'm not going to be very nice to economists. But you're a very special person since you've come to listen to a sociologist. Any political scientists? Historians? Geographers? No, don't. Yes, okay. Anybody? Who am I missing? Who am I missing? Nobody? Okay. Many sociologists. All right. Very good. Well, I'm going to tour what, for 40 minutes or so? Okay. Let's We'll see how far I get. Carolina, are you okay? Yes? Okay? All right. And if I go too fast, please tell me to slow down, okay? Now, I think I'm going to have to start at the beginning. What is sociology? Before I can get to public sociology. And for me, sociology comes from an iconic American figure, C. Wright Mills, the sociological imagination. No? Anybody? Yes? There's some connect, right? And he said that sociology was all about, or the sociological imagination was all about linking personal troubles to public issues. Personal troubles to public issues. So that we face all sorts of troubles in our lives. For example, we may find ourselves unemployed. The sociologist comes along and says, look, being unemployed is not just an individual personal issue because we are lazy or because we are born in the wrong class, but it is, but that's already sociological, but it is a product of the society in which we live, a product of the market in labor. It is a product of capitalism, even if you will. The sociologist tries to bring the broader context, social forces, political forces, economic forces, into the picture shaping individual lives. It's linking micro processes to macro forces. That is what sociology does. Karl Marx. We'll call him a sociologist today. Karl Marx talks about the experience of workers and relates that experience to capitalism as a system. The workers themselves don't spontaneously understand capitalism as a system. Karl Marx brings them potentially an understanding of that system and the way it generates crises and potentially destroys the conditions of its existence. That's Marx. Emil Durkheim, that wonderful book on suicide. You know, suicide. That's what converted me to sociology. I was in Cambridge, England. I hated it. I was a mathematician and I hated mathematics. Sorry, I was saying I was a mathematician. And I saw this book in the library on the desk and it says suicide. Oh, and I was already very depressed. Maybe to commit suicide. I saw this book. I opened it up. And lo and behold, reading the book, I saw suicide is not an individual act. But it is a product of society. And I was no longer depressed. I was very happy, and I became a sociologist, and never again thought of suicide. But the point is that Durkheim shows how this very individual act is actually closely related to the character of society, how anomic or normalist society is, how alienated society is, how egotistical, how it produces individualism. Again, linking micro-individual phenomenon to macro processes. And you can do the same with Max Weber. The famous book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, is all about how individual Protestants, Calvinists, created the foundations of modern-day capitalism. Modern-day rationality. How a religion can actually create the conditions, a society that actually destroys the religion. So again, it's linking the micro processes to large macro forces. That, I think, is what sociology is all about. However, it's not just about that. You know, what distinguishes, and here is the embarrassing moment, what distinguishes sociology from economics on the one side and political science on the other? Well, I think distinguishes sociology from economics and political science is that economists, they are interested in the expansion of the market. The political scientists are interested in political order. The sociologists are interested in the expansion of strength of civil society. Those organizations, institutions, social movements that are not part of the market and not part of the state. And where civil society disappears, sociology disappears. And you can start with Pinochet. Sociology disappears from the university, civil society has disappeared. And you can do it to Mao's China, Stalin's Russia, and Hitler's Germany. Where civil society disappears, sociology disappears, or goes underground and becomes, in a sense, dissident. So, sociology takes the standpoint of civil society when it examines the link between micro and macro. Look, just think about the student movement I've been hearing about, and have been for several years in Chile. You know, in the United States, students also suffer from increased fees. In my university, they have tripled in the last 10 years. So they're paying $10,000 a year, students, for fees. And that's cheap. They say it's a bargain. But it's $40,000. But students have been protesting, but they still see this as an individual problem. Fees are increasing, how am I going to survive? I have to work longer hours, take out a bigger load. What was interesting about the Chilean movement is that the Chilean movement had embedded in it a sociological perspective that this individual increase of fees was to be understood in terms of the transformation of the university, the privatization of the university, the commodification of the production of students. So there was in the movement a sociological understanding of the personal troubles linked to public issues. And what is interesting about the student movement is that it was linked to civil society. That it took the perspective of civil society and had support from the public against market and state. See, the economists were saying, it's very good, and they say in the United States too. It's great to commodify the production of knowledge. It's great for the university to be privatized. It's great for knowledge to be produced for profit. That's how knowledge should expand. That's what the economists say. And the political scientists, together with the state, say, those students should not be protesting. They should be repressed. And one of the interesting things about the social movements is the level of repression. Whereas, what is interesting is that the student movement here in particular did have support from the public and from civil society. At least that is how I have learned over the last 2 days and before. So in a sense, the student movement had embedded in it a sociological analysis, a sociological vision. And often that sociological imagination does develop in social movements. Okay. So I'll tell you what sociology is according to myself. You see, I have to say this because sociologists never agree on what it is, the sociology. So that's my view. The link between micro and the macro and the standpoint of civil society. Now, what is public sociology? Well, it's very simple. It's bringing sociology to publics. Starting a conversation between sociologists and non-sociologists. You shrug your shoulders. So what's so important? What's so significant about that? universities in the world spend their time talking to whom? Other sociologists. Who do they write for? They write for other sociologists. They write in journals that nobody can understand. Not even all sociologists can understand what other sociologists write. I remember when Enrique Fernando Cardoso, before he was president, he came to Berkeley in the early 1980s, and he started laughing at all of these sociologists in the United States exchanging papers with one another, writing papers in journals that no one ever read. And he said, oh yeah, you can be critical, you can be Marxist, yeah, nobody cares. But where I come from, it's a different story. Because where I come from, says Cardoso, when one writes critically about society, one ends up in prison. Because in Brazil, sociology is spontaneously, or was, public. It becomes part of a public discourse. And so when I go to Brazil or South Africa or India and I talk about public sociology, people say, what's the big deal? Obviously sociology is public for non-sociologists. Well, it's not obvious. In many places, sociology is for sociologists, what I call professional sociology. Okay. You know, what would be a public sociologist? Who would be a public? I was thinking that Alberto Hurtado, how do you pronounce that? Hurtado? Okay. Alberto Hurtado. Now, do you know? I mean, he's a saint. Padre Hurtado. Right? So what did he do to distinguish himself, to become a saint? He was what? That's what happens. When you become a public sociologist, you become a saint. or if you become a saint, you become a public sociologist. What did he do? You know, he was born, I've been looking into this, 1901, died in 1952, and during his period on Earth, he actually devoted himself to concerns with the poor. He actually created an organization called Hogar al Cristo, right? So the homeless of Christ, basically it's homeless shelters around Chile. He was very interested. He got his degree in Belgium in law and particularly in labor law. He wrote a book about labor trade unions, so he was very committed to the interests of the working class as laborers. He wrote a book called Is Chile Catholic? A Catholic Society, which seems to me to have been, I haven't read it, but seems to be a really interesting sociological analysis of the place of religion in Chile. This was a sociologist and very much a public sociologist. And it is not surprising that you name your university after him, because this is a Jesuit university, and Jesuits have always had this intermingling of public and intellectual engagement. In fact, one of the models for me of public sociology comes from Boston College in the United States, a Jesuit college, which has had a department that is very committed to public sociology, even though they didn't call it public sociology. So here we have just one example, but there's a long history of public sociology in Chile and in Latin America. All right, now I'm going to treat you to my PowerPoint. Let's see if this works. Okay, forget that. Ah, yes, well, yes, if you're interested in more examples of public sociology, I just did a course in Berkeley called Public Sociology Live. And you can find it on the website of the International Sociological Association and the Digital World, of which I have a number, but the one I'm really interested in is this last one called Public Sociology Live. They are public sociologists from around the world having discussions with Berkeley students about the dilemmas of public sociology. In India, in Brazil, in Spain, in France, in Colombia, in Lebanon, China. Fascinating stories, looking very different in different places. And you can find it, again, same website, if you're interested. It's all video. It's amazing what you can do these days. Alright, let me get down to business. Public sociology. Okay, I've talked about what public sociology is. And I juxtaposed it to professional sociology. Professional sociology, sociology for sociologists. Public sociology is the conversation between sociologists and publics. Two-way conversation. Now let me say immediately, there can be no public sociology without professional sociology. Professional sociology builds up accumulates the body of knowledge we call sociology, what we learn in universities, the traditions that follow from Weber and Durkheim and Marx, the feminism, the Latin American schools of dependency or of coloniality. This is the bodies of knowledge that are essential for us to link micro to macro and to bring these ideas to publics. So, public sociology depends upon the professional sociology. But I think also professional sociology gets its energy and dynamism from its engagement with publics. So it's a two-way interdependence. But there's an antagonism too. It's an antagonistic interdependence. Because the professionals speak to one another and are reviewed by whom? Peers. We colleagues review each other, work peer review. Whereas public sociology is got to be accessible to all and is evaluated by publics. Very different. So there is interdependence and tension. Okay, that's a simple world. The real world is more complicated because we have something called policy sociology. Yes. Sometimes people confuse the policy and the public sociology. Policy sociology is the sociology that we use when we establish a relationship with a client, an apparatus or agency in the state, a labor union, an NGO, or a multinational corporation, or a multilateral agency. We perform a service. We solve a problem defined by that agent. And we are there to solve a problem, and often we get money in exchange, a contractual relationship. That's policy sociology. It's an instrumental relationship between the agent that wants the knowledge and the sociologist who provides the knowledge. It is not a conversation, which is what defines public sociology. They are very closely intertwined, but they are analytically different. And the public sociology is this public discussion, very often of the policy decisions made by sociologists. The public sociology is the conscience of policy sociology. But as you see, that's only three. American sociologists can only think in fours. Everything has to be 2 times 2. Otherwise you can't build your career. So what is the fourth? It is called critical sociology. A critical sociology is a sociology that first and foremost criticizes professional sociology. That is to say, criticizes the foundations of professional sociology.